Hello, everyone.
Hey guys, welcome into the podcast. On today's podcast, we are going to be talking about if domestic discipline really works, why do I keep getting spanked so much?
But of course, before we do, if you're enjoying this content, would you go ahead and hit the like button for us? And also, if you're not a subscriber yet, hit that subscribe button because you know every time someone hits the subscribe button, it makes me smile.
And if you want to help support us in what we are doing here, help us continue to do it, the best place to do that is over on Patreon. So a link to our Patreon is down below.
So I have a feeling we're exploring this today because you've got asked this question a lot.
It's come up recently. I think that there is a lot of curiosity around this idea of if domestic discipline really works, if this is really something that we are doing to improve and modify behavior, if we're doing this to get to a better place in our relationship, why aren't we getting there? Why am I still being spanked so much? And I think that there is I would almost call it a misconception, but there is this idea that people have that you go into domestic discipline kind of with a point and purpose of kind of working through or working on these habits and behaviors. And then once you do that, once you get into a good routine, a good place with that, then discipline becomes almost non-existent in your relationship. And that may be true for some people. That might be what you want to use domestic discipline for, but that's not true for every couple, and it's not true for us. And so we're going to talk about why discipline continues to be frequent in our relationship and why we have seen that pattern in other people's relationships and kind of talk through about why that keeps happening. But I do think that it's important to also mention that on the podcast, because we talk about this subject a lot, it might feel like I get spanked a whole lot more than I actually do. I really don't think that we overuse discipline, and I don't think that I'm actually earning spankings as often as it might feel like is happening because of the podcast. And
to be fair to some of you who I know didn't ask these questions maliciously, again, to be fair, I entered into this dynamic thinking that there would come a point where by doing this, we would no longer have to do punishments, corrections, things like that. But as you evolve in this dynamic, you actually realize, which obviously we're going to delve into, that actually this is, there is something about not doing it and actually continuing in the process that is actually, you realize how it's so beneficial to your relationship.
There are a lot of benefits to domestic discipline, and I think we will explore a lot of this in the post show. If you don't know, we do have a members only post show for YouTube members as well as Patreon members, so definitely check out those options if you want access to that post show. But in the post show, we will delve more into like the point and purpose behind discipline and how it creates like stability within the taken in hand and within the relationship, and why that's so important to continue to not only establish but maintain and build upon. So that's kind of going to be our post show topic. But to get back to this topic, why do we have frequent discipline? Part of that is because we are both human. We are not perfect. Neither one of us. I mean,
Nope.
as perfect as I wish Coda was, as perfect as I think he is sometimes, he definitely struggles in his role just as much as I struggle in mine sometimes.
Yes, and as Aria just said, we're not perfect. And really, obviously, we've talked about this several times. We started domestic discipline because we didn't like where our relationship currently was. And so if you think about it kind of in reverse, we were in a relationship where we weren't doing corrections. We weren't doing punishments, right? Because we were not in a domestic discipline relationship. And so one of the reasons, which may seem kind of very simple and on the surface here, is we look back and go, oh, wait a minute, we tried that already. So we're going to continue to do it because we're seeing the results that we always wanted. And so, that I think is the biggest thing, is that we realize, we're both not perfect. We need to put certain things in place and help us to succeed, because we were already living in a place like that and it just wasn't going well.
It's true. And as we have established our domestic discipline relationship, we do go through highs and lows of, establishing the rules, being really consistent, having the focus and the drive. And then things happen. Complacency sets in, we get comfortable, or, maybe we start making exceptions. Maybe I start to think, well, it's not that big of a deal. I'll just explain it. He won't mind. And on your side, sometimes that has worked. And if the standards and rules are not held with accountability, then mistakes start to happen. Complacency sets in. And so when we start to notice those patterns, we have to reestablish, these are the rules, these are the standards, these are the expectations. And then we go through a period of more frequent discipline to reestablish those expectations again.
Things like complacency are actually really difficult to overcome. Those are things that, if I'm not careful, I know I definitely fall into them. And that's what happens as human beings. Sometimes, we get tired. We get into those things where we go, oh, I know I've been doing this a while and I'm just tired. I'm mentally, physically tired. But if we're not careful, we can fall into those traps really, really easily. And that's when the wheels and everything starts to come off the rails, right? And so, and everybody that can tell you in any type of profession, in any type of relationship, and any type of pursuit, this is a reality. And it's no different in a domestic discipline relationship.
And so that is one reason why you might look at a couple and say, she just must not be learning. She must not be getting with the program, because if that inconsistency sets in, it's harder to follow the rules. It's harder to meet the standards when those standards are not being held with the boundaries that were originally in place. I think the next thing is, and this kind of goes hand in hand, because the next thing really is that sometimes life happens. We get busy. Changes in schedule, changes in routine, even changes in location. Coda and I have moved a lot in our marriage over the years. And every time we move, every time there's a job change, every time anything like that happens, it changes our schedule, it changes our routines. And that can lend itself to inconsistency, but it just takes adjustment, and adjusting to those new situations and those new routines, those new structures, requires more discipline, more focus, and that can be a reason why more frequent discipline is happening during those periods.
And you bring up a good point here. Disciplines, really all they are is systems that you practice, right? And so one of the things that we've learned in a domestic discipline relationship is, in order to keep all of the things that we started the relationship for, which we've named on this podcast several times, in order to maintain that, in order to have those things, we've got to practice the systems that we have in place in order to have those disciplines. And that is definitely difficult at times. But the key is what domestic discipline allows us to do is, when life does happen, we have a grounding. We have a foundation that we can go back to and say, okay, life has happened here, but we have some things that we have in place that can help us remain grounded and continue to move forward. Just like you were talking about when we were moving or anything like that, we're still able to keep things in order and move things forward, as opposed to if we didn't have them.
Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that things don't kind of get a little rocky at times. Obviously, we go through periods where we don't expect things to throw us off.
Yes, right.
And when they do, that is a hard situation to navigate and walk through, and we have to step back and realize what is happening and what needs to be done about it. And this is definitely something that either one of you can bring to the other, but especially as a head of household, it's really important to kind of be forward thinking and to be observant so that you can see what is happening and make a plan to kind of handle the situation before it gets out of hand. And that's really the key here, is stepping in, offering that guidance, offering that leadership, and reinforcing that with correction, with punishment as necessary in order to maintain the structures. And again, that might require more discipline, more spanking during periods of time, but that doesn't mean that your relationship is a failure. It doesn't mean that your taken in hand is failing. It doesn't mean that domestic discipline is somehow not working because maybe you're 5-7 years into using domestic discipline and you go through these periods where there might be like 3 or 4 or 5 earned spankings that week, and you might look and say, what am I doing wrong here? Shouldn't she get the memo already? Shouldn't she know what's expected? Or as a taken in hand, you might be thinking like, I am completely failing at this. Like, I feel like I should have it all together by now. And those mindsets really are going to lend themselves to more failure. They're going to lend themselves to more struggle, because you really do want to go into any type of situation, whether it be domestic discipline or just a season of busyness where you're going to have to be more focused, and just realize that this is part of the process to get the results that you want. And discipline, less frequent discipline, cannot be the goal of domestic discipline, because if that is your goal, then you're going to look for reasons not to punish, not to use correction, and then you're actually working against your goals, not towards them.
I'll tell you, this is a trap that I fell into many, many times, as you, I know, will recall, because it was, again, my mindset was not in the right place. The mindset was, okay, we started this so that hopefully that I'll never have to punish or correct again. And you don't realize that it flips that switch Aria was just talking about. You flip a switch that goes, oh, that's the goal. Therefore, you don't even realize what you just did to your brain, that when something happens, yes, you find excuses not to do discipline, not to correct, as opposed to realizing that this is a journey. Sometimes when it seems like, and I know Aria has gone through this, wait, am I regressing? What is going on? Why has this happened more? It's just that now we're going to a higher level. Our relationship has been taken to the next level, which is what we want, but now that requires more. And so it seems like we're starting over, but we're really not.
And you just touched on the last point that we want to kind of talk through, is that when you do raise those standards, and you should always be raising the standards, when you do raise those standards, it is going to create a period of growth that will come with more discipline, more guidance through the use of correction and punishment, because you are requiring more. It's no longer this concept or idea of having a grace period or having, some stipulations. When Coda and I first started, one of the very first rules that I got was a bedtime. And that's because I am such a night owl that, not given a bedtime, I will stay up till the wee hours. And it will affect my productivity. It will affect how I show up in my relationship. And so that was one of the first things that Coda put parameters around. When we first started, my bedtime was ridiculously late because he wanted to allow me time to adjust to having a bedtime. And so over time, my bedtime has been moved up to a more reasonable time, and I no longer have a grace period. When we first started, it was like, okay, this is your bedtime. But if I was in bed within a few minutes of that time, I think it started out 10 minutes, then it went to 5. Now I do not have a grace period at all, because that standard has been shored up, has been made stricter, has been raised over the years. So every time that he put a new parameter in place, every time he raised the standard of what it looked like to follow that rule, it required a period of growth and a period of more frequent discipline around a rule that has been well established in our relationship.
That's a really good point. And then the other thing that I would bring up is that there are some rules now that have become a habit for Arya. And so, yes, I don't necessarily have to punish her for those. But what you find is as other rules become habits, other rules need to be made in order to make changes, because there are things until you cross that first threshold, or the other thing can't reveal itself. You don't see where the other problem potentially is, or not even a problem, where the other thing needs to be adjusted, right? And so that's why we say, it's at higher and higher levels, and all of a sudden you go, well, wait a minute, we didn't have that problem before. Well, of course you didn't, because you could have never seen that unless you had already overcome this one before. I thought the bedtime was a great illustration that you used, but now we've slowly had to, dial it back to where, your bedtime is a little bit more reasonable. But I think you would say for a while there, it was a little hard for you too to even get to bed on time.
It was hard. And that was definitely something that I had to adjust to. And I think that you brought up a really good point of creating new rules as you start to master the first level or wave of things that you want to kind of address in your relationship. And as you address those things, new things revealing themselves that then you want to address. For us, I know that I had a problem raising my voice, especially during tense conversations. And so that was the first rule, is that I was not allowed to raise my voice. Well, over time that became, now the tone of voice that I use is very important, and there's parameters around that. And that became the body language that I present is now also an expectation. And you see how these things grow, and the expectation just becomes higher, and it's in a good way, but there is a high level of expectation. If the only expectation I had was I wasn't allowed to raise my voice or yell, I wouldn't be punished ever.
Right.
Because I don't do that anymore. But Coda wants more from me. I want more from myself. Our relationship deserves more. Coda deserves more. And I'm capable of more. And so it's actually a disservice for him not to continue to raise the standards on me in our relationship.
And that's a good illustration as well, because when you were talking about as soon as she worked really, really hard, and we went through that process and she didn't raise her voice any longer, that's when we started to notice, oh, wait a minute, now we need to work on the tone of voice here. Because now that you're not raising your voice, now there's certain vocal inflections that are coming across as disrespectful, as things that we never would have seen before. Because when you're raising your voice, you don't have that much vocal inflection. It's staying at a high volume. Now we got to the nitty-gritty of something else, right? And that's exactly what you're saying is that as you accomplish certain areas, new things will show themselves, and that is good, because like you said, that is an area of growth. And the whole point of this dynamic is to continue growth. You want growth in the individual, and you want a growth in your relationship, because a relationship that is not growing, I think, is a failing relationship. And that's exactly why many of you started domestic discipline, and we did, is that we didn't want our relationship to fail. We wanted our relationship to continue to grow, and to grow well, and to get closer to each other in such a way that we really, I can even say, I didn't even realize we could get this close. And even now we see, wow, we can even get closer and closer because of domestic discipline.
And we have just noticed that as we lean into these systems, as we lean into the process of having higher standards, we lean into the process of using discipline, using correction, using punishment to not only set the standards but reinforce them, that is what leads to success for us and for many couples that we have seen and interacted with over the years. It's what growth looks like. And in order to continue to grow, you have to continue to adapt. And as you adapt, it requires these periods of adjustment, and those periods of adjustment usually come with periods of more frequent discipline, but that doesn't mean that domestic discipline's failing. It doesn't mean that either the head of household or the taken in hand are failing. And it just means that you are doing what you need to do to get to the goals that you've set.
We should never get to a point in any aspect of our life, but especially in our relationship, where we get to the point where we feel like, okay, we've reached where we want to go. Because obviously the whole point of life, I think, is to strive for things, to grow, to become better and better, and to acquire knowledge, to acquire all of these different things, but especially in your relationship, to grow closer, to know one another better, to be better than you were the day before. Because it's all this relationship is, hopefully you would say, is the best relationship, and one you want to look back many years from now that it was the most significant relationship of your life. And so if that's the case, why not always strive to cultivate it and make it the very best that you can?
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us for this podcast. We really hope you enjoyed this topic. If you want to join us for the post show, links on how to do that is down below. And otherwise, we will talk to you next time.
See you later.